April.
A while.
Might be till April. So during that time, I think many of you already know, and we've already announced that Lumpur Pasano will be coming here for the Vasa. That's right, Lumpur Pasano from.
Did I hear you right, Ajahn?
That's right, you did. So Lumpur Pasano will be coming, and
Ajahn.
Ajahn Dhamma will be coming with him, as well as Nanagarka, Anagarka Thai. I think he's been in Anagarka about 5-6 months now. And that's so that'll start probably late June, early July, and I will probably depart around the same time. I think July 1st is the actual date, and the other 2 monks who will be here will depart around late June. So if all goes according to plan, we'll see. You never know what's going to happen, especially as most of you have hopefully had that attitude in the last year. But even more so, we just had these 2 monks arrive. We'll be seeing Ton Nisabho off in the next week and a half, even less than that now. Very sad for me. And
Me too, Ajahn.
yeah,
I'll miss you guys and
it's been
Ajahn.
it's been a very good experience. So I'm happy for everyone that they had the time with Venerable Nisabho and Ajahn Kovalo a little bit for there. I'm happy for myself to have had that time. But you won't be too far away.
Nearby.
So yeah. What else do we have? Yeah. So just thinking about, changes in life and arrivals, separations, dukkha, anicca, anatta, the usual things. If our sound is off, please let me know. I can get a bit closer to the mic.
The Lumpur Pasano news, it's big. It's quite big news. 3 months here is great.
4 months.
4 months is a great boon to the community. So I think he'll be aiming to walk Bindabat on Alms Round as well. So
yeah, with Ajahn Kurundamo. So also Ajahn Kurundamo, people are very familiar with him being here. And we are hoping to, sometime in the not so far future, be able to go to PFOD, Portland Friends of the Dhamma, maybe once a month, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that will commence before July, but we'll see how the COVID conditions, what they allow. Speaking of COVID, today, we didn't bring our cards. But, Venerable Nisabho and I got vaxxed, the Pfizer vaccination, so that was interesting. Had no effect. I don't really feel anything.
I get a little sore on the arm, but it was a great, very glad.
I don't even know.
Grateful.
Yeah, I don't even know if I was stuck. Like I kind of.
There's
I was a little sore there.
Something.
Yeah,
maybe they.
Sore.
Yeah.
It was just water. Placebo.
There's a surplus
Placebo
in a
effect.
nearby county, so we got on a list thanks to the kindness of several people and driven by Susan Svensson as well.
It was very nice of her to drive us.
Yeah, so we're very grateful.
And Susan Benedict to inform us about everything. So yes, that's what's happening in the life of the monastery. We're training the 2 young monks on alms round, so they're getting to know things. And
next week we might get an in-depth look into their psyches.
Yeah,
we'll maybe interview them on.
We'll do a interview next week, next Tuesday, and so we'll introduce the community to them, and they'll be. Oh, hi, Mom. They'll be doing some the alms rounds on their own. Actually, you're gonna walk behind them next week.
That's true.
And maybe just shout out, go left.
Shout.
Or don't. Just follow them into the abyss. Hopefully it won't be too late for the alms donors. Anything else?
I have our first question.
First question, okay.
Yeah?
Yes, if people have questions, please post them and we'll try to answer them as best we can.
So, Ajahn, on Alms Round, Shelley asked about the role that avidya, or ignorance, plays into the chain, the 12-link chain of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. So how does ignorance, which is the first link, fit into the whole chain, and what role does it play?
Well, I'll start off with just a little bit, and then you can
go for it. No,
you. I'm just going to say that it's interesting to think of avijja as it's not like the opposite of avijja would be wisdom, panya, and so it's not though that it's sort of like we don't know something. It's like it's actually like there's an obscuration with ignorance. So it's like, yeah, you think of like a window that has fog on it, or even ice, kind of crystallized ice where you just can't see it, and mostly it's in a way obscuring our clear understanding of the Four Noble Truths, of dependent origination. It's obscuring our understanding of essentially like how dukkha, anicca, and anatta work. So we often will see the impermanent as permanent, or we'll see things that are self as not self. We attribute things to there being sort of an essential sense of who and what we are. And then we see, dukkha is actually the opposite, which is like bliss and happiness. So that's how avijja really obscures reality in a way, sort of the bigger picture of what we experience and what we see and understand. And wisdom is when we begin to actually say, oh, actually there are impermanent things, and those things that I attribute towards, like for example, having a partner around, and then just one day, just like snap of a finger, they're gone. And we recognize in that time, oh, I took for granted that wasn't possible, that someone would actually not be around. This is why it can be so heartbreaking to lose a partner or lose children or whoever it is that's very close to us. Or just the conditions that we have being the same and continuing on, and our jobs or our even our own minds, how we think about how we like particular things or how we don't like things or whatever it might be. It's just anything in our overall experience that continues to evade our understanding that it's other than that. It's different than how we actually believe it to be or see it as. And it's a full buy-in. It's not just like I believe it like it's I believe out of faith. It's like we really actually like are convinced of permanence in the impermanent, and we're convinced oftentimes operating from a sense of self. This is who I am. This is how I think. This is what I understand, believe in, how I think about myself. My own thoughts are myself. And so because of that, we call that just an ignorance, a misunderstanding, a misperception of reality, and it's fogged over. So when the glass is unfogged, then we kind of have a bigger or a clear understanding, panya, arises. So that's one way of looking at it, and of course, and then also adding dukkha in there is one of the biggest obscurations. Is we're often searching for how to just keep everything pleasant and happy and warm and wonderful, and not recognizing that we're just hiding dukkha often. One easy way to see that is just anytime you're moving is often a sense of an experience of dukkha that you don't want to be experienced, so you move, and it can be very subtle. It can be, there's a little pain in my back, I might not even notice it, and I'm just running away from that unpleasantness. And we do that all the time. We may want pleasant taste, so we aren't satisfied with something that's bland, or we want to see more interesting sights. I think somebody just told me how their daughter was just thought it was unbelievable how people could watch these movies made in like the 60s and 70s, seeing one of them from that time era and think, how could you watch this garbage? It's like totally unexciting.
I love Lucy.
Yeah. So this is what we're constantly doing, is we're obscuring that. It's a process that we're engaged in, and then we get to how that is sort of conditions are what the Buddha talks of as the 12. I'm not sure if steps is a correct word for dependent origination, but it's sort of the 12 processes. They're kind of spirals, and they kind of feed off of each other. So how is ignorance the beginning of that? How about you? You go for that.
I mean, the 12 links are notoriously difficult. Like, there's a famous sutta where Venerable Ananda says, this seems clear as day to me, dependent origination. And the Buddha says, don't say that. Venerable Ananda, this is one who understands dependent origination, understands the Dhamma. And so yeah, what you're pointing to, Ajahn, it's I like what you pointed out in terms of the feedback cycles, because usually the 12 links are portrayed as a wheel, but the complexities in terms of the feedback loops are important to take note of. And I think that the first link is avidya, or ignorance, and at its most basic, that would mean ignorance of the Four Noble Truths and of applying them as a skill. So, when the Four Noble Truths, the first of which is to comprehend suffering, to abandon its cause, is the second directive associated with the truth. And when I think we become skilled at seeing clearly our situation, like you said, Ajahn, we perceive that actually these things we've bought into and taken as permanent are changeable, not reliable. And so we stop chasing after them. And that represents a moment of vidya, of applying the first noble truth and therefore the other three correctly, because we see the suffering inherent in something, and so we don't chase after it. But when we don't see clearly the costs and benefits of a certain sensual desire or a relationship, or cling to it, then we do buy into it, and that's the next link of sankhara. We make a motion and intention towards it. And there's a sutta called the Papata Sutta in the Precipice in Samyutta Nikaya, and it says that those Brahmins and contemplatives that do not see as it actually is the truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering, revel in fabrications. Reveling in fabrications, they fabricate fabrications. Fabricating fabrications, they fall off the precipice of birth, aging, and death. And for me, that speaks exactly to where ignorance fits in. It's when you don't see clearly the thing you're chasing after, then, and see that actually the costs in many cases are greater than what we put into it, then you do invest in it. And that's where all that initial motion of the heart into something and complete buying into it and not seeing clearly the situation, that's where that whole cycle begins. So, I mean, just to give an example, I think, before many of us practice, maybe we really enjoyed going out to, raucous parties, or, some sort of random action flick in a movie. And then as we do practice, we see more clearly that actually, the whole act leaves a residue in the mind, and it's not actually pleasant when you have something to compare it to, like a more peaceful sort of happiness. And so you stop going because you see more clearly. And psychology, points pretty clearly to the fact that when people see that something's the cost of something, they don't pursue it as much. But the difficulty is really getting the heart to acknowledge, like, the suffering as well as the happiness behind something, and weighing those actually accurately. And if one can do that and see the drawbacks, then that's applying the Four Noble Truths well, and then there's Vijja, and the whole cycle doesn't begin. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about why it's so hard to put desire down, and so difficult to recognize suffering. I mean, it seems like something fairly obvious that as the Buddha talked about it as a noble truth, that there is dukkha, there is suffering. It seems like something that should be all of us recognize. Most, or I don't want to say all. There probably are a few people who somehow come with the delusion that they don't suffer, but at all. But I think most human beings have a little bit of the delusion cleared away, that they can say, yeah, I've suffered a bit, I've lost this, or I don't get that, or and why is it so hard to not only recognize suffering, but also not see that if we're just able to put the cause down, which is desire, we'd have a much easier and happier life. And I think the sense that most of us do have a clarity around just some sense of dukkha, of stress, difficulty, pain, and that we don't want that. We'd prefer not to have a life with the presence of that. But yet we keep picking it up again and again, and we do it again. I mean, it's like moment to moment. Each time our minds just move off into a different thought or whatever it is, we're just fooled. We're fooled, we're tricked. And that's really avijja operating, that sort of delusion where we're just living in a obscured realm or life. Our advantage or understanding from all of our senses is really based on avijja. So it's sort of like the Tibetans have a phrase called emaho, which is like, it's amazing, it's incredible, and you can relate to that in terms of why do we keep getting fooled. And I think that it is very much based on this this ignorance that we carry around, and then you look at the opposite, which is sort of the positive of that, like why recognizing dukkha and seeing how the cause of it comes from desire is so important, is that there is some sense of happiness that comes out of that, because we realize we don't have to continue along the lines that we've continued with, which is causing ourselves more and more suffering. And when we make that choice, then we just feel very, really happy for a moment, but then we come back to the dukkha again, and because it's so easy for us to figure out how to alleviate with exercising our own desires. And I think that there doesn't have to be a lot of complication around understanding that, but there does need to be an intention or a movement away from continually looking towards sensual desires, or becoming something, and our movement towards our thinking processes that are usually unskillful. It's just kind of, I don't have to always go towards that habit, towards that movement of mind. And most of us know it, but sometimes we need reminders, or we just need practice, really. Just need to keep practicing how to put it down.
What you're pointing to, Ajahn, in terms of the propensity to misjudge to constantly be fooled by our senses, it's well documented. There's a rule in economics called the peak end rule, which these two economists discovered in the 1980s. And there's this really famous experiment where they had participants stick their hands in a container of cold water for maybe 30 seconds, and then remove it. And then they had another group stick their hand in the same container for maybe 40 seconds. But at the last 5 seconds or so, they warmed it up 1 degree, so that those participants, even though they had their hand in the cold water for much longer, the fact that at the very end, when they took their hand out, the water had warmed up 1 degree, meant that those participants were much more willing to stick their hand in again later. So they perceived their whole experience as actually more pleasant, even though by any real arithmetic they suffered far more because they were in this freezing water. So we're just such bad judges of our experience because what we cling to are the peak moment in an experience and the very end, and we forget all the suffering in the midst of that. And when we look at so many of the things we expend our energy and life force on, the new object of desire. I mean, how many hours of work does one put into a new iPhone? And the thing is, there's another sutta where the Buddha speaks about how neutral feeling when experienced, or sorry, it's a nun, Dhammadina, neutral feeling when experienced with mindfulness is pleasant. And I think that's the thing, is that when we're mindless, then all this sort of neutral territory just fades away, and all we remember are these peak experiences. But as we begin to meditate and practice, then we begin to perceive the subtle pleasure that can pervade our lives, and that begins to counterbalance these peak and end points so that we see clearly what actually is going on, and we don't always have to depend on peak experiences that actually involve much more suffering. We don't have to buy the iPhone. We can, or go out to the party. We can just be at home with people we care about or ourselves and find happiness there. But perceiving that subtle sort of happiness takes, like you said, restraint and practice.
Yeah, I think it's a subtle change of value, but it's not. I remember like when there was one time we were talking about peace once. It was I can't remember when exactly it was, but peace is just peaceful. It's not really exciting, and it's not edgy. It's not exciting. It doesn't have, as you were saying, peaks, and we're so addicted to the big charge that we don't get the more subtle, long, slow, mellow burn that's quite helpful for us, until we recognize that, oh yeah, this is actually more pleasant than the kind of mind that is so agitated by desire and trying to get something. When we're trying to get something, then there's this constant like movement of the mind, and it's kind of going out of itself. These are sort of the way I think of the word outflow, and we're just like constantly like launching ourselves out, now here, now there, just trying to find any subtle delight, and when we start to recognize, oh, there's a delight in this calm, quiet peace, then we start to value it more, and then we do say, oh, no, I want to stay at home, or no, I want to I want to just try to reconfigure my experience so I can see from a different angle, and see that the coarse enjoyments are not really beneficial for me, and they're also not as enjoyable as like just that sense of peace. I think most of you who've tried meditation know that when you do find times when you are able to observe a thought and you don't just move mindlessly with that thought, or you are able to stay with your breathing or whatever it is you're noticing, and that lasts even just a short time, even just a few seconds, or if you're able to do that many times during your meditation, or you're able to sustain long periods, it's just amazing. It's an incredible experience. Oh, I don't have to see from the way that I've been habitually seeing or experiencing my life. There is this other way of being that I might not know so well. And the more we get to know that, then the more then it's sort of enjoyable, happy, extremely. I mean, it can be extremely happy. It can really provoke a lot of sukha, and also rapture and pity, and so it's very helpful for us. Yeah, so it's just interesting how easily we fall for the quick fix, but don't see like what's actually really the long, slow burn of realizing nibbana, and ending our own avijja, ending our own ignorance.
Yeah.
We do have some other questions from all day. So the first question I see is, any suggestions on how to let go of comparing oneself to others? I've been speaking a bit.
I think that the mind frequently moves towards comparing itself in the same way that it moves towards aversive states, in that it's something it can really chew on over a long period of time. It does provide some sort of strange, not nourishment, but perverse satisfaction. I mean, the sense of self is crystallized, and we're constantly searching to, people frequently ask how karma can happen if there's no self. And for the record, the Buddha didn't say there's no self. He avoided the question. But, the important thing is that it's not that karma happens in the context of self. It's that self happens in the context of karma, which means that the way we create a self, moment to moment, is an act of karma. It's a habit, which also implies that the type of self we create, and that flavor of self, is also a habit and takes on many different forms. So when we, are desiring something through greed, there's a sense of self that forms in the shadow of that desire. And similarly with aversion. And you can really get, and self-righteousness is notoriously powerful in that way, the sense of self. And it's powerful, that sense of self. It gives us something to orient around and crystallize, and it's stabilizing. And if we don't have anything else to lean on, then it's how we depend on it for security and something to grasp to. I mean, it's one of the bases of clinging, and in this sense. And so that action of comparing oneself it's a very particular kind of creation of a self. You can feel, with these narratives of comparing oneself, sort of that sense of self that forms as something not worthy, or not as good as another, or in some cases better. But regardless, it's very prominent, that sense. And I think that's where a lot of, the Buddha said to let go of a habit pattern. One sees the satisfaction, the drawback, and the escape. And it's important to see them both. So to see that even though we might be comparing ourselves negatively to another person, there's actually there's a satisfaction in that. There's a sort of hot burning of the self, even if it's extremely self-degrading. There's something satisfying about really laying into oneself, or at least it's very solid and orienting. It's junk food. But when our minds are so hungry, and when we're habituated to those habit patterns, then it's automatic, and it is brutal and constant in modern people, largely from our Christian heritage, and largely from consumerist culture telling us we're not good enough. And so I think a few things, spreading metta towards oneself is helpful, those basic movements, but also really perceiving that the draw of it, and what is pleasant about it, or strangely satisfying. And more than anything is finding something else that the heart can orient around and rely on, and that it can get pleasure from. Because as long as it doesn't have another source of nourishment, it will go for the junk food, in terms of this way of gaining some sort of satisfaction, like a dog gnawing on an old bone. So, yeah, I think this is the benefit of the pleasures that the path provides, is it gives you something else to orient around, not just the calm of peace that, Ajahn Chunda is speaking of, um, or the happiness of calm, but also the joy of keeping good morality, of a true feeling of self-worth, of security and a noble purpose, security in the sense of a purpose that's worthy. These subtle pleasures of the path, the mind won't let go of these negative habit patterns unless it has somewhere else to gain nourishment. So much of the path isn't just seeing the drawbacks of those negative habit patterns and ways we create a self, but also finding alternate sources of ways to feed the heart that are actually healthy and nourishing and not self-destructive. And that's why it's important to cultivate meditation and to do good works and to come deeper and deeper into this path, because when we come more and more in line with the Dhamma, then there's immense strength in that, and we're not forced to constantly crystallize a self to orient around, because somehow we've entered the stream of Dhamma and we're held by that instead. So there's not the need to constantly crystallize a nucleus of self by these self-destructive patterns of greed and aversion, even towards oneself. But I have this is perhaps one of the most difficult ones for me. So I think it's brutal in Western culture. I think it's really, really, in modern culture in general. It's, yeah, and probably especially for women in body image. Ajahn?
I was thinking about how the Buddha talks about the conceit of I am. And when we think about conceit, we think about this same thing, comparing to other people. But it's interesting that the Buddha really says that any thought you have of I am and you fill in the blank is a conceit. So he actually has, it's interesting how he has 9 patterns of this. So if you think you're better than someone, and you're not, you actually aren't better than them, or you think you're better than them and you're both equal, or you think you're better than them and you actually are better than them, or you think you're equal and you're not, they're better than you, or you think you're equal and you are, and you think that you're equal and actually you are better than them, and then it follows with the negative. You think you're worse than someone, but you actually are better than them, or you think you're worse, but you're actually the same, or you think you're worse, and and it's true, they're better. What's interesting about that pattern is he flushes out every way you might compare yourself to others, and it's always conceit. So whether you think you're better or you're worse, or you're just the same, there's conceit there, and so the conceit comes back to the I. It comes back to the I am, and so the original question was, how do we stop, or how do we let go of comparing ourselves? I think it's important to not. Nisabho was talking about how we, in both ways, we might think that we're better, or we might think that we're worse, and all of that is again based on this avijja, this ignorance, because it's not really about whether we, there is a better or a best or whatever it might be. It's about our sense of I, or I am this, and that's the reason that it's a conceit, because we're believing in this sense of self, this sense of I and me, and the word Nisabho used was crystallize, and we are, or you think of sankhara, we are forming, we're creating, we're fabricating this sense of who and what we are, the sense of me and I am, and that does it's always sort of has a feeling of stability, ignorant stability, but there's stability there in terms of believing that we keep creating what I am, and that's our conceit. So it's also important to think, we might think, oh, this person who boasts a lot and who thinks they're better than everyone else, that's a real crime, or that's much more sinful than somebody who thinks they're worse. But it's all the same, because it comes back to the I. And I think the way that we can let go of that, we've talked about many times on the live stream, and Nisabho mentioned it, is nourishing, and how to actually see nourishment from an angle of what happens when I don't do that. When I recognize I. And if we start to look at that just in our thoughts continuously, it's just like I am, I have, I feel, I want. It's just constant, like it's a barragement of just like of saying these things to ourselves, and so it's one of the ways of letting go is just recognizing that as an impermanent thing. There's nothing evil about it. It's just the garbage of our mind coming out, and it's how we think that we can create stability. And the irony is the way that we create stability is by creating instability. We start to let go of what we think is foundational in our lives, and that's me and what I think and how I feel, and how I feel in comparison to these other people. Questioning, am I better, am I worse, whatever it might be. And we start to kind of separate our experience from that, and that can be ungrounding, it can be destabilizing. Even the sense of stream entry is said to be a real destabilizing experience. Is like, wow, what's this new perception of reality that one is looking through? Like putting on a new permanent pair of glasses that just changes everything, all the colors, all the ways that we see. And that's not just, it just doesn't necessarily kind of snap into, as I understand it, like just everything's wonderful. So in terms of experiencing the self, and sort of letting go of that comparison, or experiencing not self, or trying to work around that and see clearly through it, it is sort of rocking the foundation. And I think one of the ways is to be comfortable with that rocking, that kind of, you might kind of feel, I want to know who I am. I want to know how I feel and what I think and what, I want to know I. So, we can kind of get sort of try to get a feel for that, but not see it as unpleasant. That's sort of like, if I just start teasing that apart, that me and mine and how I think about things and what I am, and just start pausing around that, then we start to see the fresh angle. And it does actually come from our experience, for example, in meditation, when you just, for a few moments, you don't experience thinking. You just experience your mind without thought, right? Or your mind without the intention to think, or to form an I am, or I feel, or I should, I better, I have to. And these just weigh us down. They're very heavy things that we lay on ourselves all the time. So I think just starting to identify like what actually arises when one sees clearly, when we're creating a sense of self, when we are comparing ourselves to others, and to just, I'm comparing myself to someone, like this is just a habit. I'm just kind of continuing along these lines. I do this constantly. So what's it like when I just stop for a moment and I say, okay, I'm not going to do that. And then we can reverse that and say, like, is it really true? We can ask about anicca, which is like not sure. It's not sure that I'm better or worse, or or we can say, like, if we think we're better than somebody else, we can say, well, is that really true? They do all these really nice things. And then we kind of reverse our whole perception of another person, or we say that to ourselves about, I'm a horrible, terrible, no good, absolutely, nothing positive person. But then we say, oh, well, I did actually take out the recycling today, and I helped my friend, and whatever it might be. There's so many good things that we can do or identify.
I took out the trash today.
Yes, he did. He took out the trash today. So yeah, these are just some thoughts about it. I think there's not an easy way or a quick way to it, but one can let go of the self by just putting an effort into seeing how it is we're creating it. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. We do have another question. So shall we move to the next question?
Let's do it.
Okay. Sumrit. How does being kind or having metta for oneself fit in with the concept of non-self? They both seem conflicting.
That's a good question.
Go ahead, if you want.
I mean, so I think it's important. The Buddha um, was asked on numerous, at least one occasion, if there was a self or not, and he didn't answer. And in many translations, it's his teaching is the teaching of anatta is conveyed as there is no self, not self, whereas um, perhaps a better interpretation or way of looking at it would be what Ajahn Thanissaro refers to as not self strategy, in that the Buddha doesn't go into if there's a self or not a self, because it's not really relevant. Rather, he says to look at what we cling to as ourselves, the five khandhas of form, our bodies, feeling, perception, mental formations or sort of programs of personality, etc., driven by intention, and then consciousness, sense consciousness, and see that none of these, all these are shifting and aren't worthy of being called a self. And as we see that, we let go. And I think the idea is that then you come to nibbana, and whatever that is rests beyond articulation of self or not self. And all that to say that the Buddha didn't say that there was nothing behind a human being or in a human being worthy of, that there wasn't a spark of life or chitta, that, we do suffer, and there is a subject, if not a reified one, we experience. And so I think that one could think perhaps of spreading metta to that in oneself or another that can suffer and can become liberated, the chitta. But also this just, when you start to speak in terms of these ultimate levels, it just gets extremely tricky, especially for someone like myself who's nowhere, is not realized. So I think it's helpful to remember that the Buddha frequently, in several suttas, he speaks about how for the sake of communication, he uses worldly conventions such as the pronoun I, and speaks in terms of persons, because it would be a lot to be like, this bundle of five aggregates, does this or does that. So just to say that for the sake of where most of us are at, I think that it's okay to think in terms of individuals and oneself, and at the same time we can work to see how each individual component of what we usually cling to as a self isn't worthy of that, but it doesn't mean that there's not something one can spread metta, that spreading metta towards oneself or another isn't deeply beneficial, and that there's not something that suffers in people. But I don't know how you'd speak about that in any coherent terms, and I think that's why the Buddha shied away from speaking in detail about the nature of unconditioned awareness. He only points to it a few times as consciousness without surface, nibbana. And those are beautiful little moments, but I wouldn't get caught in them. There's something that suffers and something that can be liberated, and we know that intuitively when we see it in people, the life, and all that deserves love.
Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky, but I think it goes back to a little bit of what I was talking about last week, which is the sense of self that many of us have, or the sense of I, or as I am defined by my khandhas. I have these thoughts or these feelings, these experiences are all mine. If they're not mine, who are they happening to? It's such a habitual process that we're consistently attending to, that to say that wishing metta or kindness, or I'm not going to refer to myself anymore at all, it just goes back to we have to work with what we have right now. And I don't think there's many people who, it can happen. I think I think there through various sort of vipaka karma, the results of good karma, that people can sort of enter the stream quickly and penetrate through self-view, which is a sort of the big, the very sort of largest sense of avijja, is what I'm talking about, where you actually see very clearly from an experiential level that the self is not defined by these khandhas. And so I think that's where it's on an experiential level that the Buddha is more talking about, not self. So with working with what we have, if you think about like the fact that I and what I think about myself and how I am and how this is just like as I said, a constant barrage to ourselves of these thoughts and feelings and ideas, we can't just stop feeling this, identifying with the khandhas. It just doesn't work to turn it off. It's not like a computer. You just press a button. It's more like you have to type for quite a bit, a really long time, until you figure out like maybe how to program a computer and the intricacies of it, and that takes a very long time. And so using metta or kindness towards oneself is still recognizing the self. It's sort of utilizing self in a positive way or a good way. It's kind of also in a way reworking that idea of self in terms of if there's hatred or aversion, then it's clouding over again with avijja, with ignorance, that potential to see clearly that okay, maybe I'm not right, maybe I'm not such a horrible, no good, terrible person, or these other people are not so terrible, and so it's really counteracting aversion by using a sense of self in a way, because for example, if you're wishing yourself well-being and you're doing that to yourself, it's not like an amorphous sense of what you are. Most people imagine an image of themselves, or they picture themselves in some way, or experience themselves, and they're wishing that person happiness. And so I think it's more of a sense of like, well, I have to work with what I have right now, and that is a sense that there is this I and me and mine, and so I can't just break free of that instantly. And so this is the way we can work with it in a positive way by still utilizing it. And so we wish ourselves well, we wish ourselves peace and happiness and a lot of the things that we aren't doing, because like what we mentioned from the beginning, we're telling ourselves how stupid I was and how could I have done that, when I was in 7th grade. That was really horrible, and I know I'm 59 years old now, but when I was in 7th grade, I was just such a I can't believe it, in front of all those people. And I'm exaggerating a little, but not really. Like, people can just bring up this sense of, I'm still that same person I was in 7th grade, but we're not. We're just condition ourselves to believe it. And we condition ourselves to believe it every morning we wake up, or evening we go to sleep. Like, this is who I am. When I get up, it's me getting up again. So essentially, we have to kind of use ourselves and our habits around that, and our I-making and my-making and our becoming in a way that's positive and helpful. So that's my way of thinking, that it's not really contradictory.
I think your metaphor of the computer is a really good one. It's sort of like trying to get beyond it right away is like tearing off the motherboard and trying to see how it's all just electric current. You just and try to affect a change, but just use the keyboard for a while. Yeah, it doesn't work so well to go straight in. So yeah, right. Ajahn, I really agree.
How are we doing on that?
It's about time.
It is about time. Okay. And I think we'll answer Sumina's question next time. But yeah, so it was good to see everyone. So we'll have next Tuesday we'll have a live stream, a special edition live stream. So it'll be 4 of us, and our last conversation, technically, I think.
My last did,
yeah. Well, it'll go down to 1. I'm sorry to say, but not comparing myself to others. It'll be what it'll be. So yeah, there'll be Tuesdays next Tuesday there'll be 4 of us, and then after that I'll try to continue on without my friend here. I don't know if I can do it.
Right.
Okay, with that, be well. Have a good night, and